All right, we're going to have to talk a little faster here. We're going to try to attempt 2 chapters on this video because you have both of these together. They're both due at the same time, and also both chapters deal with the aorist tense. Chapter 22 deals with second aorist active and second aorist middle indicative. So we're going to begin with that. Note that we don't deal with the aorist passive here. Remember, I told you about the future, that the future passive is quite different from the middle, and the same thing is true in the aorist. So we'll learn the aorist, the passive, a good bit later on. So a little bit later on anyway. So let's talk about that. Note also that we start with the second aorist, and the reason is some verbs do have a different stem than the first aorist. Some have first aorist forms, and some have second aorist forms. You'll learn the differences in this chapter and in the next chapter, these 2 chapters that we're dealing with right now. The characteristics of aorist verbs, usually, they refer to past time in the present tense and indicative mood anyway, and not only the present, but all of the moods in the indicative. But they always indicate undefined action. Oftentimes it's said as point action, and sometimes that is a good way to describe it. But undefined is a better word for that. We'll talk about that more in translation as we look at the translation. And Mounce explains that in section 22.2 and 22.3. So we're going to look at the second aorist first because it's closer to the imperfect. And also note that we use the verb lambano here instead of luo. We've used that all the way through, but there is no second aorist form for luo. So we switched to lambano, which means I receive. So when we look at the formation of the second aorist active, notice that it has an augment like the imperfect, and that it has a stem. Well, it's the aorist active tense stem. It has a connecting vowel, and then it also has the secondary active personal endings. You remember that as nu, sigma, blank, mente, nu in the active. So you've got the augment, the stem, connecting vowel, and then the endings for the secondary active. And of course the stem changes. That's the other thing that is important. You notice that the stem for lambano is lambda alpha beta. So it's lab instead of lam. It's just changes that take place in these when various things are added to it. So some things to note. Footnote 4 on page 195. It's better to translate the aorist as the simple past. Many people translate it with the helping verb have, but I would encourage you to save that helping verb have for the perfect tense so it won't get confusing as you do your translation. Later on, as you learn translation better and do more of it, you can certainly make adjustments as you need to. Section 22.8 has some important information, and it is certainly important for you to learn the second aorist form, and that certainly is going to help you a great deal in translation. So remember, secondary personal endings indicate past action, but so does the augment that's there. That's the clearest sign. And when you get out of the indicative, you won't have the augment on the verb forms. So pay attention to that. Second aorist middle is the next thing we look at. It begins at 22.14, and you'll notice that it is also formed with an augment, the stem, and then the connecting vowel and the middle endings. And that would be the main soto, methystem, nu, ta endings. We use the verb here, genomai. You will see the change from gamma iota nu to gamma epsilon nu in the stem. So just note that as you go along. In fact, Mounce uses a deponent verb here, but remember there are some others as well. Final words on chapter 22. Keep up with the master verb chart. Learn the second aorist active paradigm that is in section 22.6, and also the second aorist middle paradigm, which is in 22.15. Now learn the vocabulary for chapter 22, and then do your exercise then the workbook, exercise 22. You want to parse 1 through 10, and then translate 1, 3, 5, and 7. The vocabulary is apothnesko, artas, balo, gay, ginomai, ice, erkomai, it's a compound verb, you'll notice, exerkomai, another compound, eddy, heurisco, like the word eureka, it means I found it, and that's what heurisco means. So lambano, ute, two particles put together, proserkomai, and pur, which is puros, that's the word for fire. Yeah, again, gives you previous words and some advanced information and some exegesis, and you want to take a look at that as well. All right, we'll move on to chapter 23. Chapter 23 is the aorist active and middle indicative, the first aorist active and middle indicative. Read the exegetical insight as usual. Remember the meaning of the first aorist and second aorist. The first aorist stem does not change. The second aorist stem does change. That's the only difference in it. Remember, while aorists often indicate action at a point in the past, it is not the time of action, but it is the aspect that is important. It is undefined action. Characteristics of first aorist. It has an augment, has the aorist active tense stem, and then it has a very recognizable tense form, and that is sigma alpha. So in luo, it would be elusamen. So you would add the sigma alpha with the augment, the stem, the sigma alpha, and then the ending, secondary ending. Stem's generally the same as the present stem, but there are some changes due to the addition of the sigma alpha. The sigma, of course, is what creates the change. He mentions also in 23:10 through 23:11 the contract verbs. They, of course, lengthen, and you also want to note that there are some exceptions and eccentricities, as is true always. Same thing is true with the liquid verbs. You want to read carefully what he has to say about that. Note 23:15, if you will. And then your aorist middle indicative. This is first aorist middle indicative. It has distinctive forms for the middle and passive. The passive is different. We'll learn that later on. We'll get to that a good bit later on. Characteristics of the aorist middle. You have the augment, the aorist active tense stem, and then the secondary middle passive, or middle endings for the aorist. It's only the middle. So here's what you need to remember for chapter 23. Keep up with your master verb chart, as always. Learn the first aorist active paradigm at 23:5. Be able to write that. Learn the first aorist middle paradigm at 23.18. Learn the vocabulary for 23, and then do exercise 23. That'll be parsing 1 through 10 and translating 2, 4, 6, and 8. Then you want to pay close attention to the review, and you see it also in the PowerPoint. The final slide in chapters 22 and 23 is the preview. I said a review in the PowerPoint, but it's a preview for the weekly quiz. You need to learn to write the secondary personal endings, both in active and in the active and the middle passive. Learn to write the imperfect of a me. You just need to learn that. That's really will help a lot in translation if you know that. Learn your vocabulary words for chapters 21, 22, and 23. Learn the second aorist active paradigm, be able to write that. The second aorist middle paradigm as well. And then in chapter 23, you want to learn the first aorist active paradigm and the first aorist middle paradigm, along with the vocabulary for all three of those chapters. Don't forget that. All right? So we'll see you in the next video.